Thank you. Good morning. Mr. Jardy, Chairman, Brother Ang, thank you for inviting. A real pleasure. Fellow speakers, special mention to my boss, Sim Ging Guan. I am actually not used to being on stage with him being down there. It's usually the other way around. So added pressure that my boss is going to evaluate my performance. Couple of things. I've now been in the sector nearly 5 years. It seems like just the other day, and mind you, I'm still considered new. A lot of people still think, oh yeah, but you just joined from the private sector, right? Well, it has been 5 years. It also has been at least another 5 that I was on the board of one of the social service organizations. So it's coming up on 10 years of experience of what I'm doing here, and frankly, I'm still learning a lot. But what I thought I'd do is share with you a few of the observations I've had over this period of time, both as a board member in a social service organization and now looking after basically building capability and capacity of the sector in all of the ways that we've interacted with a great number of you from NCSS and SSI on how to, as a board member, work better to build the type of talent that your organizations need. So that's basically what I'm going to try to do, is so take it more as advice from a fellow traveler, a bit from the trenches, although sometimes I get a better view than that, but just more of what I think could work if we could all do it together. I have several parts of my life. One of the parts of my life is I'm actually an academic. I teach at the university, and I actually teach talent management. And I make the same point to all my students, be them executives or MBAs or undergrads, as I want to make to you before we start, is what is this idea of talent management? A lot of people confuse talent management with the job of HR, with the job of the HR function. So I want to start there. That is not true. Talent management is a strategic decision that we as board members need to make. Talent management has to do with how the organization will implement what it set out to do. It is of strategic importance. The human resources function then helps us implement that strategy. It figures out how to best get it done. It figures out how best to hire, how best to pay. But the board needs to be involved in how do you set the stage. So I want to start there because this is an important distinction. This is not an operational function. This is not how payroll works. This is not how the interview process works. This is why should we hire specific types of people. This comes at very key questions like, for our next CEO, do we hire somebody from private sector or not? This is a strategic decision. It has pros and cons, and it should be discussed at that level. So if we understand each other then, that's what really what we're talking about, is not what are the HR policies that I should have, but what is the HR strategy that I need to put in place, then we can talk a little bit about how boards can help us do this. 3 things that if I can summarize what I have done over the last 4.5 years at NCSS, or what I have learned over these 4.5 years that I want to just point out. First, in terms of challenges, is our limited resources to attract talent. Let me tell you a bit about that. One of the things that I have seen is VWOs or social service organizations or nonprofits in general struggle with this idea of how do we go out to find people. Part of it has to do with the fact that each one of our organizations, when you look at it individually, is relatively small. We can be very small, only less than 10 people. We can be fairly large, like maybe an AWA, a Tehuacan, or an NKF. but we're still relatively small. And relatively small means that our ability to generate the kind of noise that we need to do in a very crowded market where right now it's a seller's market for employment. That is, unemployment is very low, and there are a lot more job opportunities out there than there are people chasing after them. It makes it very hard for us to create that kind of noise to attract people. That kind of noise needs to happen from the value that the particular social service organization or the particular nonprofit brings. We don't really recruit people because we pay great. We don't really recruit people because we have outstanding value proposition that has to do with you will get to be the CEO of the global something at any time in the future. We bring people in many cases because they resonate with our cause. We bring people because they're passionate about what we do. That passion, that noise that we need to make out there in the market must be clearly heard. And a lot of it is not an issue of do we have enough resources to compete, is how do we combine what we do to try to bring it together. At NCSS, we've started this whole idea of the tribe. And the whole idea of the tribe is around the fact that as a single organization, any one of the VWOs will have difficulty. But if we can combine all of our voices together into a single voice that we can go and I hate to use the word compete, but in the minds of potential employees, they have choices. They could work in education. They could work in health. They could work, for all you know, in Shenton Way. But we want them to choose to come and work with us. And as a single voice, we have a better way to do this. But even if you don't follow that route, if you still want to follow your own route, the noise that you need to make needs to be very clear. Because we have that limited resource, we need to punch above our weight. So each one of your organizations needs to think, and your boards need to think about how do you become the equivalent of Singapore's little red dot. If you are a small organization, how do you punch above your weight to make your message heard? Because that is what's going to help you attract more people. And the board needs to have clarity around this idea. But it also needs to have clarity around the idea of the kind of people that we need. It's not enough just to say I need an accountant, or it's not enough to say I need an accountant that has passion for my cause. It may be more important to say I need an accountant that is going to help me build what? And that strategic sense is what I hope that boards can actually provide to the way things are run in terms of attraction. The second one has to do with retaining staff and motivating staff. Here we run into the usual thing, which is, charities don't pay, charities don't have career opportunities, might as well volunteer, or it's a job I'll do when I retire. We've all heard this. So how do we do this differently? Well, part of it does have to do with, unfortunately, how you pay and how you build careers. And if we're not doing a good job of that, as a board, you need to put management on account that it needs to happen. Now, many boards choose to do it the other way around. Many boards choose to say, oh no, we must not pay well because passion is the only thing that matters. Last time I spoke, I told you this and I'll say it again. Passion is important, but passion, you cannot take it to the bank. People still need to pay their mortgage or their rent. People still need to figure out how they're going to make a living for their families. So if we make it more difficult, it just becomes that much harder to bring people and keep them in. So we must be able to at least pay fair. We put the guidelines out as a ways to ensure that everybody knows what fair looks like. Now you can choose to go above or below the guidelines. They are just guidelines, they're not mandatory. But it is a guide for you to know more or less where that is. And we also make them public so that people also know where those guidelines are. We're actually quite proud of the fact that we've gotten to the point where we are more or less equivalent. I just this morning got the latest that came out of what university graduates are being paid. The business school at SMU, which is where I teach, starting salaries are now 3.6. Our starting salaries are 3.4 for social workers. That means we're already in the ballpark. And that is an important part. Because we don't want money to be the reason people join the sector. I have always agreed with that. But we don't want money to not be the reason they stay and do elsewhere. So it should not be the reason they come, but it should also not be the reason they stay away. Careers are also an important part of what we do. And if you're a small, particularly social service organization or a small nonprofit, how do you then build a career? We can't build it solely on loyalty. And this is an important consideration. Many boards still think that loyalty is the one thing that they're looking for. Yes, loyalty is important. But at some point, particularly if you're a small organization, some of the people that you have, you can no longer promote. When I talk to employees, what they usually tell me is, I work for blah, blah organization, and the center manager has been there for 17 years, likely to stay for another 17 more. No more career law. What to do? So, as a board, you have to make a choice. If it's important for the loyalty that that person who's been there for 17 years stays for another 17, then you also have to agree that the person coming up has to go. And we have a hard time with this. We have a very hard time with this. Our view is very simple. As long as they stay in the sector, we're all good. Train them, and then let them go. Let them grow somewhere else. Hopefully, by the time your person that has been there for another 17 years by now leaves, then you can bring them back. Or not. Doesn't matter. If we are building talent for the entire sector, that's what counts. In the end, what we are now trying to focus on is that we don't lose people from our sector to go elsewhere, that they don't go from what we are doing to private, that they don't go from what we are doing to another sector of society. I see many people that are going into retailing and so something else, that you sort of go careers in retailing. Haven't you heard of the internet? But they somehow think that retailing has better career options than staying with us. And they see it because they don't find a way to move up. The next one is a tricky one, is operational boards versus strategic boards. The best boards I've seen, and this is just one Angmo's opinion, okay, is those boards that are more strategic. Those boards that are really focused on how we're going to grow in the long term, and then what kind of people do we need to grow. If we have an idea that our organization needs to do this and that, and we want to grow it in this and other direction, then what kind of people do we need, and do we have them already in place, and can we prepare them? Those I have always found to be great boards that are helping the organizations make things happen. There are, however, other types of boards, and you may recognize which type of board you are. And the other type of board is the type of board that is always second-guessing management, that questions management, that wants to make decisions for management, and that in fact does. Some of those are problematic because management then doesn't know what their role is. And the board, to be frank, also doesn't know what their role is. So we end up in a situation where, okay, is it you or is it me? Are you deciding or am I deciding? And this happens with a great deal of frequency. From the management side, they basically feel that if the board is going to make all the decisions, they don't need to prepare. But I've also heard the board side. The board side is usually something like, well, my management is not prepared to make these decisions. Or worst, I don't trust them to make these decisions. That's tough. Because if that's how you feel, that your management is not prepared, or worse, that you don't trust them, then you as a board need to do something about management. How do you prepare them? And how do you begin to trust them? And if you don't, or if you're not going to, then what are you going to do? These are key questions. So this is one that I have continuously found to be a dilemma, because it is your typical, two-sided argument. He said, she said. Management feels one way, the board feels another way, and they both think they're right. So, a few ideas on how to deal with this. And again, this is all in the form of advice, so take it as given, and hopefully you can get at least one idea back with you, so next time your board meets, you all can start talking about, well, how do we do this better? One is have a more strategic view of long-term needs. It's interesting, a lot of what we see from our side is boards or even management that only looks at the next year. They build the budget and they try to figure out what the budget is. The better boards are the ones that have a 3 to 5 year outlook. Where do we want to be in 5 years? What kind of service level do we want to have? What is the size of our organization in 3 to 5 years' time? And then start working on the talent side of, do we have the people that are going to help us get there? And when we get there, do we have the people that can manage it? So if you're thinking of going into new ways, into new areas, or into whatever it is you're doing, making it bigger, can you build it up from the point of view of the people that you're going to need to get there? That strategic view makes a big difference. The second one is to have clarity around which are the strategic roles that you need to have a voice in and which ones you don't need to have a voice in. You usually want to have a voice on any key program manager that reports to your CEO, and perhaps your finance and your head of HR. You need to have a view. Are they there? Are they the right people? One of the things we see with some degree of frequency as well is new CEOs come in or new EDs come into the organization and they want to change. And they want to change, among other things, the team. Particularly those that come in from the private side, it is far more frequent for them to understand that when you come in, you sort of build your own team. And they start with the same mindset. A lot of the people that are in the organizations have been there a long time. So you start creating this tension between the ones that have been there a while that sort of think loyalty should count for something. So CEO comes in, wants to change, other person says, oh no, but they want to change and they want to change me. And the board now has to make a call. Am I going to support the CEO that just hired, or I'm going to support the guy that has been here for 10 years? Tough choices. And how do we decide? So these are important things because you need to have clarity before it happens, not after it happens. You need to have clarity on what the CEO has authority to do and what you want to reserve the right to do. Otherwise, it's very unclear. Otherwise, the CEO doesn't know what they can and cannot do. So this is an important one. Third one is framework for comp. And I mean it as a framework, not as a specific decision on how should I pay each person. Some boards want to have a view of the salary increases for every person. That's probably too much. What you should have a view is on a budget, or you should have a view is on a policy. We want to pay according to the salary guidelines, for instance. We want to make sure nobody's paid below the minimum salary guidelines. That kind of a framework, that's important for the board to decide. And then let management work on it. Those decisions are important to have. I find that it's not as frequent as I think it ought to be. The same with retention. What kind of program do we want to put in for retention? Does that mean that somebody that has been here 10 years, we want to put in a retention scheme to make sure they don't go anywhere? Or if you already know that you have a key person, but you can't promote them, do you put in something in place to try to keep them, even though you can't give them a career? Those decisions as to policy, those decisions as to framework, the board needs to have. And you should think about whether or not you have those in place. The fourth one is the leadership pipeline. We unfortunately have had a recent run on new CEOs that didn't stay for more than a year. There are many ways to look at this, but the one way I choose to look at this is, why is it that we didn't have enough people internally? Why is it that we're always having to look at the outside? Now, when I say this, you look at me, huh? I'm still, remember, new. 5 years in, I'm still new. I'm still from the outside in many eyes. But the truth is, a lot of boards have not really worked on the idea that I must have ready replacements, or at least I must be preparing possible replacements. It is always better that you think about who can be the right person to replace your key leaders, not just your CEO, and to make sure that they're getting the right preparation to get there. The fifth role of the board is culture. Now, this is simple to see, but at the same time hard to do, because you're not there every day. Part of what you need to make sure is happening is that you as a board are instilling those values and that culture that you want into your leadership team so that they can execute against it. What type of organization you want to have. That is partly by example, but you can't do it every day, so you have to do it a lot by messaging. What type of organization is important? And that is a key part of what you as a board need to do together. Do we want to be an organization that empowers people? Do we want to be an organization that really focuses on client centricity? Do we want to be an organization that really focuses on advocacy? What is it that you are going to stand for, not just as a mission, not just as a value, but as a way of doing things? That is another key part of what the boards need to do. I also want to take a couple of minutes to talk about the role of the board for the board. Okay? Because the board also needs to worry about itself. One of the key things, and Gerard mentioned it this morning, is you must know what it is you need. When we were talking about this morning about patrons and what people do, if you think of board members as my friends, if you think of board members as people I know, if you think of board members as people that can donate, that's one way to think about your board. But if you think about your board more in the way Gerard was talking about it, which is what kind of skill do I need? Do I need somebody that knows about finance? Do I need somebody that knows how to fundraise? Do I need somebody that knows about human resources? And what he was describing about the work that he did when he chaired NKF was exactly that. He was looking for people with specific skills that would help him organize, or reorganize rather, what was happening at NKF at the time. That is crucial. Skills. The second part is that board composition needs to gel well together. I mean, if you have 2 or 3 finance people, how do you make sure that they all can work well together? That they don't have 3 different points of view about whatever is crucial. So that, as a chair in particular, you need to make sure is happening well. You also need to make sure that you have all of the areas that you need covered. In particular, I must say, and I'm biased, but okay, I get to be on stage, so I get to tell you, the human resource part. Do you have on your board an HR expert? See, just a 30-second sideline here. I've been in HR my entire career. I started doing this nearly 40 years ago. I had hair, if you can believe that. Every time, as a HR expert, I go into a management meeting or into a board meeting, every person I'm talking to thinks they know more than I do. Everyone. So this doesn't happen to the head of finance. You know, if you're the CFO and you talk about finance things, everybody goes, oh, yeah. If you're the head of operations, you talk about manufacturing things, everybody goes, yeah. But if you talk about HR, everybody goes, what do you know? Get HR expertise on your boards that is real HR expertise. People that know how to run human resources. Plan for renewal. Gerard said it this morning. I'm going to reiterate the message. Don't stay too long. Don't overstay your welcome. We have a comply or explain now at 10 years. My view, 6. After that, go somewhere else. Bring the joy to another board. And I mean it sincerely. We need more cross-fertilization. We need more people working with other people so that we can improve everywhere. And the last one, and I'm going to do a pitch here for my friends at CMPL and MVPC, board effectiveness. It is crucial that you measure how well your board works together. I find this to be a bit lax. In fact, let me show you a couple of things. We run board networks at SSI, and one of the things that we found, as you can see here, is that most people do lip service to this idea. Don't. To any chair people who are in this room today, one thing you must do this year, if you haven't done it, is evaluate the effectiveness of your board. It is free. CMPL does it for free. Right? Mildred just confirmed that. Yeah? And it's hyper useful. Not just super useful, it is hyper useful. I don't use the word Uber anymore. It's okay. Another thing I want to make sure that you get, and this is again from our board network exercise, the one all the way on the right. We don't have a clear idea of how do we measure if, as a board, we've done a good job. We think we know how to measure if management has done a good job, but as a board, we don't know how to measure ourselves. This is also not good. You should have clarity around the strategy that your organization is following, and if as a board you've gotten there, you should know that. And if you haven't gotten there, as a board, you also need to say what part of it is us. All right, I'm just going to summarize then. Two things that I've been trying to get a message across. One is, as an organization, make sure you take the strategic view, not the tactical view. Focus on the key roles that really make a difference. Do work on frameworks. Do ensure that you have a clear set of people in place, and worry about culture. And from the board point of view, make sure that you have the right people. Make sure that those people can work well together. Make sure that they're trained. And this I want to just make a small point. Make sure that they're trained on two things. One is that they have the skills, but also on governance. Make sure that you have a succession plan for your board, 6 years, and measure results.